All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Yahani. I'm one of the organizers or volunteers behind Python Community Sri Lanka. Hope you're having a good day this far, and well, thank you for joining this session, and hope you will get to learn something interesting and something new about Python. So before we go into introductions, I have a couple of announcements to make. As you may already know, that we are organizing another PyCon event for next year. And the planning has already started, but we are short a few hands. So if you are into volunteering and you would like to give something back to the community, please leave us your contact details. I will share a link in the chat in a while where you can give your contact details. And also, we're looking for good speakers who are willing to do sessions in next year's PyCon. And if you have any recommendations or know people who are good at speaking in conferences, please share the link with them too. And let's start the today's session then. I have today Mr. Indika Rajapaksha. Indika is an independent developer and an open source enthusiast. He has more than 15 years of experience in software engineering. He is currently working as a programming consultant for Datafields, Portugal. He has solid foundation on software development skills, and he's using Python in daily basis for his current project. So I'm sure he has a lot to share with us all. He asked me to share this poll with you all. So go into the polls tab and please vote for the option that best suits you. So without further ado, let's invite Indika to take us all on an adventure on Python functions. Indika, the stage is yours.
Thanks, Hani. So, good evening, all. So, let me share my screen, then we can start with it. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. So, before start, I will give some things why we need this kind of session. So, it's a feedback I get from my friends and some other people who contacted me. So they wanted to know some more about Python and what are the different things they can do in Python. Otherwise, people think this is just another language. But with my experience, I don't think it is true. So that's why I created this session and contacted our uh, Python community and share it for all the people who interested with this. Right. So let me give some idea what we are going to do today. So you can see that we will start with our adventure with some things we can do with arguments. I think I hope you are a little bit familiar with programming, right? I think at least not in Python, but some Java or any other programming language. So you may should have a little bit experience how to write a function, not very big things, right? So then we will talk about how to write the functions robustly. I will explain what are these things actually when we go through the session. So then we will talk about the built-in functions where you can actually reduce your coding and how to do it efficiently without taking too much of time. Finally, I will give you some hints and the useful things Python has to offer to you, right? Okay. So if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand and ask that question. So our organizer will direct them to me, right? Okay. So let's start. So little bit about the graphic. I know. So you may think adventure must be like mountain climbing or something, right? But with Python also there is an adventure. I will show what I mean at the end, right? Okay. So this is the our first step, knowing about arguments. As you should know, when we pass something to function, that's how you get input to the function, right? So those are arguments. So in Python there is something different called variable length arguments. I know there are some other programming languages which support this one, but Python is very, very different. When I explain it, you will see that one, right? So there are two kind of arguments where you can pass to a function called uh, keyword arguments and function arguments. Function arguments, I hope everyone is familiar. When you write a function, what you do is you give the arguments or the data to the function in the order you have defined the variables in the function, right? So that is one thing. But here we have two things, right? Two things in two different ways, which add more flexibility for your functions, right? We'll start with the args. So these args are also known as the unnamed positional only parameters. So in here, you may think what is the difference between parameter and the argument. In this session, I use them as similar meaning. So don't worry about the word I use. I mean the same thing, right? So when you write a function, you can specify arguments in way using different names, right? So, but when you do Python coding, there are always some standard. So my advice is stick to the standard the Python community has adopted, right? So then you can understand other people's code as well. Most of the time, you know that Python libraries and other things are open source. So they are always using this standard or what we are called conventions, right? So as the convention, I will use first thing as pointer args, asterisk args, or whatever name you can use it for that one. So why we use args? So it is for passing any number of positional arguments to a function. That means you don't care about the argument name. You can pass any number of arguments to the function, right? So why we need this? So the main thing is we don't have to write uh, several variations of the same function depending on the argument count, right? Let's say you are writing a function like sum which accept two arguments, then later you think you have to write it to accept three arguments, right? So if you try some another programming language, what you do is most probably you write the function with the same name, but you are providing different arguments. So you are increasing the number of arguments if you want to pass more, right? So here in Python, we don't have to do that, right? Uh, in here, when you passing arguments, we can pass anything that can be organized as a sequence or an iterable. Iterable means you can access the element, so you can get each variable one by one, right? So there is a problem anyway. If you want to maintain the order of the arguments, then there will be a problem. I will show when we will have the problem, right? Okay. So what is that main advantage of this one? The main advantage is, you know that I think you have using Python list. In list you can pack many number of elements and pass it to another function, right? If you don't write it using the pointer args, what will happen is user have to create that one and then pass into the function. So let's take the example one. So I have written a simple function called display data hardware. So you are passing a variable called data or argument, right? So by looking at this function, you can't decide what you have to pass to this data variable, right? Because it is just data. So it can be a single variable or a list, a tuple, or a set, right? So in order to use this function, you have to look at your code, right? But what is it doing is just printing the elements in the passed order, right? Let's execute this function and see what will happen. Let me it will take some time to initialize the environment, then it will execute, right? So I have created the function. Then let's say I want to print all these words, right? So what I do is I will call this function. So here I have to create a list and pass all the variables I want to display, right? Okay. So this is okay, right? The problem is user have to do this. He should look at the code and he should know, yes, I have to pass an iterable or a sequence. So that is bad, right? We want to give maximum flexibility for the use of the code. So when you use args, this requirement is not there, right? So I create a different function called display data. Previously it was display data hardware. So this is display data. You can see that we are passing pointer or asterisk args, and for args in for every argument in this args, I'll print the same thing, same code here. Only just the variable names are changed because of the convention, right? So I have created the function. Let's first do the first this way, right? Right. I will comment this code. So I will call display data. Here you can see that I haven't created a list. I just passing all the things I want to be displayed, right? Same thing. You don't have to worry about the things. You just want to pass the values, right? That's it. So, so what is the flexibility? Let's say user already have this data and he just want to print it, right? Then he don't have to split it this into several variables. What he can do is, if he have the list, he can just pass it, right? Just print it. Same. It will be a tuple, no problem, right? Same output. So there's a one thing I told you, that what will happen if you want to maintain the order, right? In Python, you can see you can use sets to keep unique elements, but the problem is it don't keep the order of the elements you have typed in. Let's see what will happen if you pass a set. Will it break the code or something else? Right? It actually don't break the code, but the problem is the order is changing, right? The very word is somewhere at the end, right? So this is the one thing about the pointer args. So you should be careful when writing function using this thing, right? Most of the time it is very flexible and you can avoid a lot of code writing for the same function with different number of arguments, right? The second thing is keyword args, short in KW args. Here we use two asterisks, pointer KW args, right? So before start the usage of keyword args demo, let's write a small function and see what will happen when you execute that function, right? So we are accepting two variables, first name and the last name, right? So I will execute this one. Okay. So right. perfectly, no problem. Right? Then what you can do with Python is, if you want, you can specify which variable you are assigning to which value. See, here last name is in the it as the second parameter in the function definition. But if you want, what you can do is you can interchange the order, no problem. Don't complain about the things. So I will first pass last name, then I pass first name secondly, right? Right. So it don't complain, right? You can use whatever order you like, right? So what is the usage of keyword arguments? The main thing is you can pass any number of keyword arguments. So actually in this function I haven't used this feature asterisk asterisk kwargs. So I will show it in the next example, right? So let's know about the advantages. The first thing is similar to pointer args, you can pass any number of keyword arguments. Here you can see that we are specifying the argument names and all the things, right? So you can't use any other name to pass these values, then it will complain about the value you pass. So when you use kwargs, it is not the case. You can pass any number of keyword arguments, right? So why we use this? Normally, let's say you have a function which accept some required parameters, but some parameters are optional, right? In that case, you can use this kwargs, right? The main thing to consider is if you accept a required argument, it should be positional always, right? Don't use keyword args when you accept required parameters, because when you use that one, user don't know what is the parameter name or any other info is not there. So you user have to look at your code, right? And also it allows user to pass whatever he wish to the function, right? So it don't complain. That is the problem. So one thing you can do is, if you use keyword arguments, you can provide some documentation about what are the optional things you are accepting, right? If you are coming from something like data science or machine learning AI, I think you may have worked with pandas library. This library use lot of optional arguments using this keyword args, right? Here I haven't used the convention kwargs because depending on the function, I think this is the best parameter name for the extra keyword argument, right? Here I haven't put documentation. I just want to demonstrate what I'm going to achieve here. So you can see that the file name and path is required, but you can pass some optional parameters or arguments, right? So what I do is actually when you pass optional kwargs, it is coming as a dictionary, right? So you have the access to the key and the value pairs. So what I do is I will print the positional parameters, and then I will print the optional parameters as well. So let me run this code and see how I am passing those things. File name is this one, path, and rest is keyword argument. So I give the name of the variable and the value, right? Okay. See, optional parameters are printed, right? So this is a one way of doing that. Let's say you are reading options from a file or something, right? Maybe a JSON format or something. What you can do is you can load these values into a Python dictionary, and you can pass it, right? The same thing here. You can see that I have assigned this additional parameters to the options variable here. When you passing that one, you have to put 2 asterisk in front of this variable, right? Then it will know this is a keyword argument, and it will work as same here, right? Okay. So one thing is here you can see that I can put even a garbage value, which this function is not care about. So that is the one pitfall of keyword argument. So why we use this kind of things like asterisk options, right? The main or the best example I can see is the Django web framework, right? So you don't have to know about the web framework. I will give you the mechanism behind this one, right? So let's say you have a page like this where user is allowed to do some filtering of user account. Let's say the user can either type the account owner name or the email. So you don't know which one user will type, right? And he will also select a account type, right? So in this scenario, since we are don't know which one will come, because sometimes the email field may be empty, so the user has typed the account owner name, right? In that one, let's say you are getting these values in some kind of variable called request, and don't worry about what I'm doing here. What I do is, whatever the values given here by the user, I get to a Python dictionary. Then what I do is I'm passing it to some other function which will accept these parameters and give me the accounts which matching these two values. That means depending on the things user have sent from the front end, it can dynamically give you the result. So this is very flexible, and otherwise you have to check whether you have to put some if conditions and check whether the account on a variable is set, email variable is set. So this will avoid this kind of unnecessary code, right? That's the thing. Okay. Next, ordering of parameters. I told about the things we can pass, args, keyword args, and we have the positional parameter, the normal parameters we use day-to-day life, right? So how we can organize these things in the proper order? Normally, or the best way is, first you put the positional arguments, then you pointer args, and then kw args, right? So I would like to give you some good example using the both of them, because you know that uh, these things offer two different things for our coding practice. But when you join them, the advantage is limitless. Let's say you want to write a function that will create an HTML tag, simply a tag that contains some text data and some attributes, right? I hope all are familiar with HTML, right? These are basic things. Okay. So what I do is I using the convention, I put the this is the positional parameters. Here content is default none. That means user can omit sending content because some HTML, you know, there is no content, right? Then he will send a list of classes to be attached to that element, and finally he will send the HTML attributes he wants in the HTML tag, right? So I will not discuss about this one at the moment. I will discuss it later, right? So we start the tag, and you know that HTML tag start with like this, and we put the name, right? Then what I do is I check whether the user has passed a list of classes, right? Then what I do is I will doing them using spaces. It's a standard way of putting multiple class values in HTML tag, right? So then I check whether the user has put some attributes. So then I will put like the attribute value and the name, right? Also, a user can omit content. For an example, let me go through the code and you will see the examples, right? So right, so this function is complex, right? The first thing is a user have to know about the parameters we are passing. What does it mean? So there is a way of standard way of doing this is using Python documentation, right? So This is what I call this the Python documentation. So you can use help function in Python, which is a standard built-in function. Then you can type it. So the user don't have to look at the code, right? If you execute this one, let's see, function is there. You can print the help. You can see you don't have to look at the code. It will explain what are the things you have to pass, right? So I have put only the element name is required, right? Let's create a simple tag called BR tag, right? There is no content, just the tag. See, you can see the BR tag. Let's then what you do is let's say you are creating TD element for a table content, table cell content, and you want to pass the content as Python 2022, right? Let's print that one. Perfect, no problem. Then what? Then you want to pass, you want to create a p tag with some content and a class name called primary. You can do that, right? P class primary. This is the content. So this one is somewhat complex thing. You want several things to be done at once. You want the input tag, and you want the input tag to be required, and you want to add some bootstrap formatting. So you are putting it as form control, and you put the ID of the HTML tag as first name, type text, and you also want a placeholder text, right? Don't worry about if you are you are not much familiar with HTML. See the flexibility of the function we have created, right? So these are the classes perfectly set, and the ID is there, and the other remaining attributes, right? So as I mentioned, you can pass it as parameters if you want, or you can for the class list you can put it in a list, and for attributes you can put it in dictionary. No problem, you will get the same output, same thing, right? So that's not the only thing Python provide. You can put some restrictions on these parameter types, right? So you can enforce positional only and keyword only parameter. That means there is some requirement maybe in your script or something where you want to limit the number of parameters or the type of parameters accepted by a function, right? So we see that if you write a function by default, you can always use keyword arguments, right? You don't have to do anything special about it. It will be supported by default, right? But starting from Python 3.8, what you can do is you can declare parameters to be passed as positional only. That means you can't pass some parameters as keyword parameters or keyword arguments, right? So let's start with the normal function again, right? So I have used the same thing, create tag. So you can pass the content and name some other things like what name of the let's see, right? So this if what will happen if we do this one, right? Since the KWRs accept anything, it just accept the thing, the name argument, but it don't contain, and it is somewhere in the memory, but it is not used, right? So we want to avoid this one because we don't want to do accept things which are not useful, right? So what we can do is and also you can see that this output is wrong, right? It is the other way, right? So what we can do is, if you are using Python 3.88 or later, you can restrict this behavior, right? So in this environment, the Google Colab, I can't use it because this is also using Python 3.7. So I ran it from my machine and get a screenshot about how you can do it, right? So remember that this is only works if you are using Python 3.8 or higher than that, right? So what you can do is you just put simply a slash after the positional argument you want to restrict, right? Anything after the forward slash can be only passed as anything before the forward slash can be only passed as positional argument, right? So what I do is I put the tag name only as positional argument and the rest of the things as keyword. So let's run some examples and see what will happen, right? So this is the function I only put this is the different thing I do here. What I do is I change the order, which give me this bad result. If I try to do that in this code, what will happen is it will complain me create tag is missing one required positional argument name. So name always have to be the first argument to be sent, right? And it should be passed as a positional argument, not as a keyword argument, right? So that's how we do that, right? So any parameter placed after the args will be keyword only parameters. And also the thing is when you put this thing think twice about what you are doing, right? Because you may be breaking code which may be running in a different Python version, right? So keeping that in mind when you use new features, always check whether you are targeting the right system, right? So how we can restrict keyword only parameters? Here we only restrict it to positional only parameters. Then we want to make it as keyword only parameters, right? Different things. That means you want some parameters to be only passed as using the variable name. For that one, you can do simple thing. Actually, this is not restricted to Python 3.8. It is supported by default before the Python 3.8 also. Maybe Python 3.2 or something. I'm not sure about the version, but you can check with the Python documentation when it was introduced. So what you have to do is first you put the parameters you want as positional or something else. Then you put an asterisk. Right here, you don't specify any name. That means you don't want to accept anything as positional. That's why you are not you only accept these two. Other than that, you have to pass the each as a keyword parameter, right? So let's run this code and see what will happen. Okay, so you are passing first name, last name, and you are passing age as a keyword only parameter. Then this code should execute properly, right? What will happen when you omit the parameter name? Because you have specified it as a keyword only parameter, you can't do this, right? It takes two positional argument, but three were given, right? So the error message is not very much detailed about what you have done wrongly, but at least it complains. It don't accept what you have passed, right? Okay. Then what will happen when you pass a third parameter and then a keyword only parameter, right? Same, you can't do that, right? So that is the things about args and keyword args. Then I will defer my talk to a small thing which may be someday come to your day-to-day work life things. Sometimes it may be a bug you don't notice, right? So let's say you are creating a list which are doing something depending on the list. Let's say you are like accumulating or caching the things you have passed, right? So this is familiar. We are passing some arguments. So you specify that if the user don't provide a list, it will be empty list. You do it like this way, right? So what is the problem here? So I will execute this function. Let's say first time the user do it correct way. He want to build a cache or something, or like temporary putting it in a list. So what he do is he will add 3 numbers and he want to put it in this list. So what he do is he will pass this to a list variable here, right? No problem. Then he use it for the second time. He put 2 values, no problem. Let's see what is the output. So no problem, it have added correctly, right? The problem is if the user is not providing the value from the outside. So you are saying that you want an empty list to be created, right? So I will execute this one. Then you will see a strained output. You wanted to be, first you want to added only 11, 12 and 14. Then you expect the next time you call it, it will be only 14, 16 and 17. But the problem is it is not the case, right? You can see that the 3 values you added before also in the list, which you don't expect normally. This is because how the Python interpreter works, right? When the Python interpreter is see a function to be loaded into the memory, it do it at only one time. So this list is created and it will be assigned to this variable the first time you run the program, right? Then it will be there always. So this initialized list variable is there. So it won't be changing from function call to another function call, right? So that's why we have to avoid this one. What you can do is don't do this. What you can do is you can put it like this, initialize to none, and then you can check if a list is none, you create a list and do like this. Equals. Okay. Right. So we learn about the flexibility of the Python functions. So then we will learn how to write it in the first place. How to write robust function. That means the function that will not break depending on the user inputs most of the time. I don't say it is 100% time robust, but maybe 75% or 90%, depending on the requirement you have at your hand, right? First thing is documentation, right? So always give a good documentation that will describe the purpose of the function and proper usage of it, right? Sometimes I have seen that code which are very complex, but there is zero documentation. Then the user have to look at the code, and after some time he's get bored and he will write his own functions, right? So keep the habit of documenting things correctly and do it the time of your coding. That means don't put documentation as a second step. When you start writing the function, uh, when you write the first line of the function, start your documentation, right? Then you can implement the function, right? But there are some situations you can omit documentation, such as you are writing simple functions which are obvious to understand just by reading the function name, right? So this is very much helpful when you write code for your company or maybe some kind of clients, right? You don't have to document everything. Even for 2-3 lines of code, you don't have to write documentation if you use a meaningful name, right? So and also you have to understand that documentation and comments are two different things, right? Comments normally you use to describe something which are complex to understand, but function documentation means you are telling the user what it is doing and how to use it properly, right? So most open source projects like Python itself getting so much popular because of this excellent documentation, right? If you take Pandas or any Django or any other project, you can see that their documentation are excellent, right? That's why community are gathering around these technologies or the programming languages, right? So for a smaller project also, and also sometimes you may be writing script that may be throw away after some time. So you don't have to write documentation. So my advice is don't overdo it. But when it is essential or when you are sharing your code, do it right way. So I have put the link about the documentation standards, so you can use it. Right. So that is about the documentation thing. So second thing is type annotations. I think you all may have aware about Python don't care about the data types of variables passed to the functions or any other methods created by classes, right? There is a problem. If the user or the developer pass some values which are not acceptable to that function, it will break the code, right? So even in the editors, you don't get any kind of information whether you are doing it right or wrong, right? So what we can do is we can like hinting the type of the variables accepted by the function. So that's what we are called type annotations, right? So the purpose of this annotation is to give an idea for the developer, not the Python interpreter or something else, right? So Python interpreter does not care about the data types you have specified, right? Okay. So even you supply wrong data types, type annotation don't complain about it. And one thing is if you introduce types for the variables, it don't add any overhead or your code will not be degraded with the performance, right? But there are some modules written for this type annotation where you can check your code at the compile time or before you running the code. So it will give any errors you have or you have done any like unnecessary passing values also captured by this module called MyPy. So you can install it using the pip install MyPy. Here also I put a screenshot where you can see that at line 6 I just call in the function. You can see it is working properly, no problem actually. But when I check it in MyPy, it will complain about I have actually here what I do is I accept two numbers and I'm telling that I am returning a number. But in here line 6 I am passing string variables, string values. So it complain about me about this problem, right? But it won't stop you executing the code. That's the great thing about that. If you want, you can use these type annotations, right? So these are simple things you specify like int, string and other things. If you want advanced typing, like let's say you want to check whether user is passing a list or a dictionary, right? For that time you can use something called a typing module, which is available in the Python standard library, right? So here I introduce the integer list and the dictionary of which having two like the key is string and value also is a string, similar to above. Code is working, but when you check it with my file, it will complain about the problems, right? Okay. So next thing is type checking. So how you can check the types, right? Here I told that when you do type annotation, it don't complain about anything, right? But when you do the type checking, you are specifically restrict user sending some unacceptable data types, right? The problem is you have to check it one by one. What is the variable value passed by the user? So this is a lot of code, right? Normally we don't do this one. because it will take a lot of time to do the validation unnecessarily, right? You have to write this code, right? So there is something called accepting generic types. So here we check it whether it is a list, tuple or a set. As I shown in the first example, you see that in the args example we pass any iterable, right, a sequence. So instead of checking individual types, what you can do is you can check with the generic types. So it will work with more wide range of data types, and it is very flexible, right? So keep a habit when you implementing a function which may be used by other people, check it for generic types. That's why most of the third-party libraries working perfectly without any problems, right? Okay, so there's a small thing about the functions. I will not go into deep into generators. Let's say you are creating a list of values you want to keep in the memory, right? Let's say you have millions of values. Then what will happen is, if you create a list, the memory will be exhausted, right? There is a way in Python where you can generate values on demand. So that's what these generators are doing. uh, you only have to do one thing. You just have to use the yield keyword instead of the return statement, right? So normally you will return a value from a function, but when you yield it, it will only return the current value or the value at the hand, and next time you create it, it will generate the next value and send it to you, right? So I will run this example and show you what actually happening is, right? So it don't create a list, so I have to turn it into a list to generate all at once. Otherwise it will just create an object called generate object. When you call that one only, it will generate the value, right? So what is the limitation of this one is, you can't create a function in a normal list. You should know the start and the end, but when you use a generator, you don't have to need the you don't have to tell the end of the sequence, right? For that one, you can always call the function and it will generate the value for you, the next value you want to get, right? Here I use think this is a infinite sequence where I don't know when it will be ended, so I just put it as get sequence number and I will just start it with 0, right? So I started that code, and when you want to start the value or the reset value, you just call the value without giving any value to the function, so it will get the first value, right? If you want to start with a specific value, what you can do is you can pass the value to the current value, and it will give you the next number, right? If you will reset the value to the given number, right? Then I have put some built-in functions where you can use all the time. Be familiar with these things, so you don't have to write a lot of code. I think most of things are familiar to you, so I thought about giving some little bit examples about these things, the lesser known things like all. When you use the all function, what you can do is in a list or something, you can check whether which values are actually true. True means not the Python true keyword, truthy, right? In the programming terms, you know that 0 is normally false, and or any other thing is true. Also in Python, empty list are also false, right? So I think you can read it in you can Google it and see what actually I mean. It is very much easy to understand. So when you do that, this all will go through the old element. If all the things are truthy, it will return true, uh, and you can get an idea whether you have the values you wanted in the list, right? Then you have any means if any value is true, it will give true, right? As I mentioned, all these three are falsy, but hello is truth value, so it returns true because it is the only element true here. Any do it like this way, right? So next thing is the enumerate function, where you have list of values, and let's say you want to create a counter like thing, right? Normally what you do is you will create a counter value outside the function and increment it within the function. So you don't have to do that. You can just use the enumerate function and it will create a counter for you, right? So it will return the counter whatever value you specify. So it is like this. So if you use the default way, it will start with 0. If you give the start value, it will start with your value. Let me give it 1. So there's another thing called SIP. SIP means you can have two iterable things with maybe two tuples. If you want to go through these two at the same time, you can use the SIP function and access both element one by one at a time, right? If you use SIP function, so this is what you can see, right? So I will skip the eval thing. What eval do is you can put some Python code and execute and see. So this is our main topic, function as first class object, right? So I think you have some experience with Python. So not only Python, maybe another programming language, you know what is a function is, right? So what is a first class object? First class object means you can create it at runtime, right? When you code in your code, you can create it and you can assign it to a variable and you can pass it to a function or you can return it from a function, right? All the things we have, the variables we have used are first class objects. So how can we use a function as a first class object, right? So this is a function I created runtime. That means I am running this code in my notebook using Python interpreter. So this is the first feature, create a runtime, and I can run it, right? So I can check it value, right? I can check what is it documentation, right? So these are the things are related to runtime things. So next I do is I can assign it to a variable, right? Here I don't execute the function. If I execute the function, I will put parentheses like this and I put a value. But here what I do is I put assign it to a variable called fact. Then using that variable, I am executing this function, right? So I can get the value 120. Then high order functions. High order functions means I told about first class objects can be passed as an argument to a function, right? So if any function is supporting a function as a argument or a parameter, we call it as a high order function, right? So Python has something called map. I put it here in the built-in function here, map, yes, right? This map function can accept a function as a parameter, right? So if I use the factorial or the fact as the first function and I want to find the values for the factorial values of these ones, what I can do is I can use the map and ask that function to process this element one by one, and I want a list of the values generated, right? So that's it. So next thing is anonymous functions. I want to cover this one because the high order functions most of the time use anonymous functions, right? Normally what you do is when you writing a function, you will do it like you use the def keyword and you write the function name and you implement the body like this. But when you use a anonymous function, that means you don't want to specify a function name. Why? Because you want this function to be reused. You want you want to use it only one time and do the things, right? So This is for adding more flexibility for this built-in function and other functions you may be writing. You don't want to write a lot of source code or write a lot of code lines to pass it to a one-time function, right? So I have list of things called clients. So let's say this is a built-in function. You want to sort it. What we'll do is it will sort it by the alphabetical order, right? Like this. No problem. Let's say you want to sort them in the length of the name, right? Different lengths. So what you can do is you just pass the key argument as the length function. So this is also a built-in function, right? Then it will sort the things using the length of the each element, right? Let's say you want to sort by a last name. You want to extract this value, all of these ones, and you want to sort it, right? In that one, you can, what you can do is you can write a function, or you can specify a lambda function. You say, just say key is the lambda. You are passing name, and you want to get the second element. According to that one, you have to, or you want to sort this one. Right. Similar to that one, let's say you want to check whether the any of the client name has more than 10 characters. You don't want to the sorting things. You just want to check the lengths, true false values, right? You write a lambda function like this, and you get the list of things this way. So it will say false only the fourth element, right? Okay. So be aware that when you write lambda functions, you can't use complex expressions like this. If and else, it is not allowed, because that is the way Python has implemented with limited capabilities while keeping the readability of the functions or the lambda things, right? So that's about the things about function. I will give two useful things you may want to try, right? You may not need it always. Let's say you have function called this factorial, right? Factorial means let's say you have number 10. Factorial means 10 into 9 into 8 into, like, so on, right? So we have something called functool module, which is available in the standard library. There are two useful things we can do with this thing, right? I will show you a demonstration, then you will know where to look at, right? Let's say I want to find the factorials from 1 to 10, right? Factorial 1, factorial 2, likewise, right? So what you can do is you can call this function, and you see that every time, let's say for factorial 0, it will be called this function one time, right? For one time. What will happen when you try to do it this factorial 10? It always call the previous ones, right? So this is actually waste of your processing power, right? Unnecessary calculating the same things again and again, right? Using these func tools, what you can do is, if you are doing same calculation again and again, you can, like, caching the things, right? Caching the things. There is one thing I want to tell about using these things. We are using something called decorators, right? Decorator. So you don't have to worry about know what is decorator is, right? So what I can simply say is, when you use a decorator, what it will do is, it will take your existing function and add some more useful behavior to that function without actually modifying it, right? So your actual function will not be modified, but it will give you some additional features, right? So this is the factorial function you have, right? So there is something called LRU cache. So to use the decorator, you don't have to know how it is working. You just import it and provide the size you want. Let's say you are giving the value as 3. So the only difference is it is having that mark here, right? Then if you execute this one, let's rerun the thing again. You can see that it don't call the same function again and again. Once it is called, it will be caching, right? So this will save a lot of time, execution time over the CPU cycles, right? The last thing is let's say you are writing a function, you want to work with different data types, right? For integers you want to behave it some other way, for strings some other way, float values different way, list or a tuple different way, right? So but you want to use the same function name, right? You can't do this with args or keyword args. For that one you have to use something called single dispatch, which is available in the functools module, right? So you will write the function using single dispatch. Here we don't implement anything because we know that depending on the different data types, you will be implementing the correct function. So when you want to use this single dispatch, you have to use the type annotations, otherwise you can't do this, right? Keep it in mind. Or you can do it in the register. I think we can pass the data type as well, right? You have to check the documentation, but I think this is very much clear than putting it in the register function itself, right? So this is two string. You can see this is the same function I'm using. Here I'm putting it as single dispatch. After before the function name, there shouldn't be any space or something in between these two. It should be immediately before this function name, right? Then you can register different kind of data type you want to accept, right? So let's see what will happen when I execute these things with different right. Could execute it. Let's execute it now. See, you don't have to do anything. Here I pass a string value, integer value, float value. You know that 10 divided by 3 is something fractional value, and here I put tuple. You have different implementation. Here even I put for the float values I put only 2 decimal places, right? But the function is same, right? So that's about it. So I will wind up here. So this is what I called an adventure. Hope you can understand up to this moment, and if there are any questions, you can ask now.
Um, okay, I think you're pretty good at this. We don't have many questions, but I have one. So I'll ask that. This is something I came across while developing, and I had to do a Google search. It doesn't display too much, so I'll explain. Like, how do we allow type hinting to accept as subclasses of a certain class? Uh,
Uh, Normally, no, we don't do that, because if you specifying a subclass, that means you are losing flexibility, right? Normally when you write the code, you always try to use the superclass type. You can do that, no problem. Actually, since our focus was on the function, I didn't specifically cover this class level things. You can do that, but I think it will take another session for you to explain this one.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, okay, I think we're done. I don't see any other questions coming from anyone. So again, thank you everyone for joining today's session. And Indika, thank you very much for spending your time to prepare everything and doing us a nice presentation and a session. So everyone have a good night, and we will see you again in the next session. Okay.